Okay, then I think we're ready to get started. Welcome everyone to now. This is our fourth in our online webinar series for OPAM, generously funded by our NSF grant and meant to increase the number of research tools available to the OPAM community. There aren't too many announcements in terms of OPAM this year. Registration is open, and we hope that if you plan on attending, that you can go ahead and register in advance. That way you'll get a nice custom name badge during Psychonomics itself. That is once again in November, in December this year. In November in Denver this year, is what I meant to say. It's my pleasure today to welcome Caro Hautekiet from Vrije Universiteit here in Amsterdam. Currently, she's a postdoc working in the lab of Chris Olvers, but today I think she's going to be presenting a workshop on pre-registration that was primarily developed in her old, it wasn't your postdoc, but your PhD, right? With the VU in Switzerland. So I think there's nothing else for me to say. So without further ado, welcome, Caro, and we look forward to learning all about pre-registration today.
Thank you, Ducky. So yes, indeed, I created this workshop when I was still in Switzerland as part of the Swiss Reproducibility Network. And I wanted to say that this is also created in collaboration with VU. Okay, so then I can get started. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about different things, but already on the right side are the slides. If you want to scan the code or copy paste or copy, I guess, the link. And so in the meantime, I'll tell you what I'm going to talk about today. So first, I'm going to very briefly touch on the problem that is in psychological research and how pre-registration can partly help with this or partly be a solution to this. Then I'm going to talk about tools and implementation. So in practice, how we can pre-register or how you can pre-register. And then I want to end today with more practical exercises. So we're going to discuss situations that you might have when you're pre-registering a study and how to deal with these situations. And then also we're going to do a do-it-yourself example in as predicted at the end. Okay, so the problem. So pre-registration kind of emerged in response to the reproducibility crisis that we have in research. And the factors that mostly contribute to irreproducible research is selective reporting. So that's really the fact that you're leaving out certain conditions, variables, or analyses that didn't work, and also omitting null results. And so the threats to reproducible science are all around the research cycle. So already when you're generating hypotheses, you can have failure to control for bias, such as the hindsight bias. You can also have low statistical power when you're designing a study. You can have poor quality control when you're conducting the study and collecting the data. You can have p-hacking when you're analyzing the data and testing the hypothesis, also when you're interpreting the results. And then also in publication, there's the threat of publication bias. And then all throughout this cycle, there's also the problem of hypothesizing after results are known. And so what is important is that we distinguish between verifying a hypothesis and looking for a hypothesis. So both are valid and both are important, but it's important to not represent one as the other and to also not use the same data to generate and test a hypothesis. This can happen unintentionally and reduce the credibility of your results. Okay, so pre-registration, a solution among others. So I want to be very clear on the fact that it's something we can do to make it better, but I'm also not trying to say that pre-registration is going to solve all our problems. It can just make our workflow a bit better and our credibility also higher. So the definition of pre-registration is the practice of publishing the plan for a study, including the research questions, hypothesis, research design, data analysis, before the data has been collected or examined. Okay, so what is it? How do we do it? So it's a time-stamped, non-modifiable online document that presents the research, its methods and goals. You do it typically before collecting, accessing, inspecting, or analyzing the data, so it can happen at different times. The content is typically the hypothesis, methods, participant information, so including the sample size, inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then the analysis and expected outcome. And you share this on a dedicated server that then allows for a unique and permanent identifier. Why would you use preregistration? To prevent selective reporting, prevent p-hacking, prevent hindsight bias, make an explicit distinction between confirmatory and exploratory, and increase your reproducibility and replicability. But also, you can have a timestamp on your research ID. Your research result will be more trustworthy. You can increase the credibility of your publications and much more. Okay, so how does this look like? So when you have a regular study, like I think most people do all the time, so you have you develop the ID, you design a study, you collect and analyze the data, you write a report, then you receive peer review, and then hopefully you are able to publish the report. When you pre-register, between designing the study and collecting and analyzing the data, there would be an additional step of the pre-registration. And so there are different ways to pre-register. What is best known is the study pre-registration combined with traditional publishing. And so I will explain a bit more in a minute. And on the other hand, we also have a format of registered reports, which I will also explain in a minute. So first, the typical study pre-registration in combination with traditional publishing. So here we submit a pre-registration in between designing the study and collecting and analyzing the data. Other than that, your workflow remains the same as before. On this pre-registration, you don't get any feedback except maybe from your co-authors, but there's no external feedback on this pre-registration. And there's also no systematic check of the reported analysis versus the pre-registration during the peer review. So often it is still expected from the reviewers to take a look at the pre-registration, but this is not yet systematically in place. And so within this idea of study pre-registration, we also have a more specific form, which is registered report. And so here you will receive peer review before you undertake the research. So how that looks like is within your normal workflow, between designing the study and collecting and analyzing the data, you will submit a stage 1 manuscript. This will include introduction, methods, and the planned data analysis, but you don't yet have any results or discussion to report. And then after you collect and analyze the data, you continue writing the report. So you include the results and the discussion, and you submit the manuscript for a stage 2 review. And so, as I said, it's an empirical article that is reviewed before the research is undertaken. And so when it meets certain high scientific standards, it can be provisionally accepted before the outcome are known. So even before any data has been collected, your study can already be accepted. And so this is called an in-principle acceptance. And then even if you have all no results or all inconclusive, it does not matter. The outcome does not matter. If you have an IPA, your report will be published. And so here there is an explicit check of the reported analysis and the protocol versus the pre-registration during the stage 2 peer review. So more specifically, in stage 1, reviewers are going to look at the first part of your manuscript to check whether the hypotheses are well-founded, whether the methods and the proposed analysis are feasible and sufficiently detailed, whether the study is well-powered, and whether you have included sufficient positive controls to confirm that the study will have a fair test. And then in the stage 2, reviewers will check whether you followed the protocol that was accepted in stage 1, whether the positive control succeeded, and whether the conclusions are justified by the data. But so it does not matter if all your results are inconclusive or not significant. That does not matter. What matters is that you followed what you said you would do in stage 1. If you consider submitting a registered report, there's a very useful website where you can look at which feedback others gave to certain journals that offer the option for registered reports. So you can look at the rating of speed and quality for different journals. So this is quite useful to look at before you submit your register report. So just to show you again, so we have this overall idea of study pre-registration, which is more local, which is something you do by yourself with your co-authors. And then we have the more specific form where a register report, where you're really going to submit part of the manuscript already and get feedback on that. Okay, so now if this works, I wanted to show you a very short clip to just repeat the difference between pre-registration and register report, because I find it very important that this is clear. So see if this works. Doki, if you can nod, if you can hear and see this.
Pre-registration and registered reports are both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, I see your slide still. PowerPoint
It
still.
says your screen sharing is paused. Okay, so maybe I need to stop and share again. Okay.
Very good.
Now?
Yes, now I see it.
Okay.
Pre-registration and registered reports are both ways to make research more transparent by creating and sharing a plan beforehand. The current research culture pressures researchers to make their studies all look successful and tell a neat, compelling story. Consciously or not, after they run a study, they may cherry-pick or massage the data to make it support a particular hypothesis, or even go back and change their hypotheses to fit their findings. Or, if the results don't support the expected outcome, they might be less likely to get published, an effect that's called publication bias. But to make progress in scientific understanding, we need to publish the true stories of how research was done, not an airbrushed version. Fortunately, pre-registration and registered reports can help with these issues, and they have other benefits for researchers along the way. Many researchers already write a protocol, or a plan that outlines the background, methods, and analysis planned for their study. In some fields, protocols are routinely published in journals. Writing a protocol before you start has many benefits. It helps you design a better study by getting you to anticipate contingencies before they happen. And it helps you remember what you planned and stay on track once you're actually doing it. Pre-registering a study goes one step further than this. By timestamping or freezing that plan and saving it somewhere, it can eventually be made public, so readers can compare the completed study with your plans. There are special repositories where it can be kept private until your final paper has been published. Pre-registration has the added benefit of giving you credibility and credit by showing that you made your hypotheses, methods, and analysis plans before you ran the study, and therefore vouching that you didn't change them to find the results that you, or the reviewers, wanted. That not only boosts your reputation with others, but it actually makes your work better by keeping you from fooling yourself. Registered reports add yet another layer. Because with registered reports, you submit your protocol to a journal. Your protocol is peer-reviewed, giving you valuable feedback at the time when you can best implement it. Once peer reviewers and editors are satisfied, the study is accepted, in principle, at the journal, based on the research question and the rigor of your proposed methods. This means the journal promises to publish your study regardless of the results, as long as you follow your proposed plan. This guards against publication bias. The manuscript cannot be rejected now based on the results. Some researchers worry that pre-registering their study will constrain them too much, leaving out valuable insights and improvements that may arise later in the process. It's important to remember that pre-registrations and registered reports are meant to provide a plan, not a prison. Your study can still change, but you've documented the initial plan, so you can transparently show any changes in the final write-up. Pre-registration and registered reports don't solve all problems, and they take time and effort, but the payoff in credibility and better quality is often well worth it. To learn more, check out our UKRN primer on pre-registration and registered reports.
Okay. Now, my YouTube is continuing, which I don't want. Okay. So back to the slides. Okay. All good? Okay. So I hope now it's clear what the difference is between pre-registration and registered report. And so here I just wanted to show you some of the benefits that pre-registration and registered reports are offering compared to standard publishing. And so as you can see, registered report is really ticking all of the boxes. So it's the more ideal method of using, but it's also a bit more complicated. It requires a bit more planning. It's not always ideal for early career researchers because you don't always know where you're going to be in the next year or in 2 years when you get by the time you get the in-principle acceptance. But pre-registration can already offer quite some benefits, important benefits like p-hacking, harking to prevent that. And it really encourages you to formulate a precise research question and to plan your study a priori. And so what I also really find useful is by thinking all of this through, you can also already anticipate whether maybe something needs to be added in your program when you're programming that you might not think of if you didn't think through the entire process of a pre-registration. So it can really prevent you coming at the end of the study and realizing that maybe you didn't include something critical in the experiment. So it's quite useful to think through this entire process. Okay, so I already wanted to check if there are any questions at this stage before I continue.
Any questions can be written in the chat if anyone has any.
I have a quick question about the registered reports.
Yes.
So you'd mentioned how so I have not done one of these, but I've been very curious about them. How typically you would submit sort of at the pre-registration stage, the intro and the methods, the plan analysis, those sort of things. Do you know how, like, are those at that stage 2, are those sort of the ideas, those are locked in, you can't really edit those, or could you modify your introduction slightly, I guess, depending on the results or your new ideas that come up?
It's my understanding that you can't really modify except if you have a clear reason why you want to add something. I think if you want to add literature based on the results, that would need to go in the discussion. But in terms of like analysis, of course, you can add analysis as you like. It just needs to be clear which ones were pre-registered and which ones are exploratory. And then in other ways, I think in any way you can always ask the editor if you're or like when you submit, like say like, okay, we wanted to add this paragraph because of something like a new article that came out that you didn't know of when you submitted the registered report, and then you can still discuss and see how like if this would work, because of course they already gave the in-principle acceptance based on the first part, so they need to be okay with that. But I think in most cases, in terms of literature, that it might need to go in the discussion.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess it also is encouraging, I guess, the idea of if you get, your registered report accepted, then they won't re-review your intro and methods, right? Those are sort of like locked in. All they'll really review is the results in the discussion. So I guess that should make it speedier.
That's the idea. And it's fine that your literature was, or like your introduction was at a certain stage when you started the study, and then any updates can be described in the discussion that were more recent or based on the results.
Awesome, thank you.
I see that Rebecca Warren has a question about whether or not additional authors can be added after the register report has been completed.
I have not had that situation or heard it. Might not be a problem if it's, of course, if this person made an intellectual clear contribution to the article. And I think these things would just need to be communicated with the editor, like we added this author for these and these reasons. And then that was different from the first stage report, but I do not see why that would be a problem. So I would say that is possible.
And then maybe as a last kind of question, I know that many journals now have started accepting registered reports, but maybe you have off the top of your head some journals that you know that are doing a good job with registered reports.
No, I don't, because honestly, I have not yet submitted a register report myself. I have one that I'm working on, but it's not yet at a stage where I decided on where to submit. It's something, I haven't done it because of what I said just before, that the problem is when you're an early career researcher and you're often switching institutions, that it's very hard to plan ahead and be able to ask for this like in a register report that you will collect data in the future, not knowing where you're going to be in that future. So that's really hard. And also because there is a lot of pressure on early career researchers to have a lot of output. And sometimes it's, or often or always, it's actually faster to not use a register report, even though I strongly believe that that's the way it should be. But at the moment, I feel like since register reports are still quite new and being introduced in journals, I feel like we're not yet at a stage where it can go as fast as regular research. But I feel like there's a lot of progress and a lot of advancement that maybe in some time we will be able to use this as a more default method. But I think we will have to wait a bit more.
I think that's very reasonable. Off the top of my head, then I know a couple of journals that I know that friends of mine have published in with registered reports. It seems that Journal of Cognition and Cortex in particular, seem to be doing a good job at pushing this sort of style of publication. But I also know that many other journals, Nature Human Behavior does registered reports, as does Psych Science, I believe. So I guess it's catching on, and soon maybe this won't be a list that's informative at all because most people will be doing it. So.
But yeah, the website I shared or that is in the slides is very useful to looking at the speed and quality of the register reports, different journals.
Sounds good. Then I think we're good to continue.
Okay, so I'm going to talk now about how to use preregistration, how to do this, how to implement this. And so there are different some are more general, like the open science framework, as predicted, research registry, and Prospero. And then you also have development of impact evaluations. And so as predicted, I think is a very nice format to use when you're trying out a preregistration for the first time, because they have this option to self-destroy within 24 hours. So I think it's really nice if you want to go through the process of preregistration, but you're still maybe insecure to actually have it online. And so you just want to kind of keep it for yourself, like print it or download it and keep it, and then not yet have the official online preregistration. Could be very nice to use this. Also maybe for students, if you want to have them go through the process without actually being having the registration online, you can use this. And so yeah, you can log in and see your past registrations. And what I really like for As Predicted is that they already on the homepage, they have this thing of like, what if things don't go as predicted? Like, how can you deal with this? They have some examples like, contrary to expectations, we found that this, or unexpectedly, we also found that. And so they kind of show that it's okay that things don't go as predicted, but that you can deviate, but you just need to be transparent and explain in the paper what happened. And so then I also wanted to show you how OSF kind of works in terms of preregistration. And so this is the page when you add a new preregistration. And then you need to choose what kind of preregistration you want to do. And so you can find these all as downloadable Word files. So you can kind of check out which one is most useful for your research. And it's also very nice to have a Word file that you then fill out to maybe share with your co-authors so that you can get feedback before submitting everything to OSF. And so typically people will use the regular OSF preregistration, and then this will look like this. So I'm going to show mostly the fields that are obligatory. So they have the red star. There are more fields, but I did not want to overwhelm you. So I'm trying to focus on the more typical ones. I also filled out some of the fields with a silly example of a study about taking breaks while studying, just to show you some of the things that you might put in these fields. And so here I put a title, a description. And so this description here, the idea is sort of that you have a very short background idea. What are you going to do? What's the idea? What is it based on? This also really helps to then make your hypothesis, make it clearer so that the reader would understand these. So sort of give a very short little background of your study. Then you can add contributors, and then you need to add a license. So this is something that you need to check out which license applies to you, or check with your supervisor how this works. They also have a help guide for this. Then they ask you to indicate the topic. This is mostly to categorize the different OSF preregistrations, so that also when you're looking for other examples, that you can kind of use these categories. Then they will ask for a hypothesis. And so I just put very simple here that we will investigate whether taking breaks while studying can increase performance in comparison to when you're not taking any breaks. Then they ask you for the study type. So is it an experiment, a observational study, or a meta-analysis, or something else? Then they also ask whether any blinding is involved. So in, I think, most cognitive research, cognitive science, psychology research, it will be no. If there is blinding, you can also explain, or if there's like other blinding that is not included in the options. Then they ask about your study design. And so I have a very simple one between subjects variable study method with 2 levels. Then they ask about the sampling plan, whether you're using existing data or not. And so most of my pre-registrations are prior to creation of the data, but you can also pre-register at later stages. So for example, at some point, I have also pre-registered prior to accessing the data, because I had my research assistant collect data. And then when I had the time, I pre-registered before actually getting the data and analyzing. But even when you already access the data, maybe to check if everything worked, if your data is actually in the files and everything, but you haven't analyzed, you can still pre-register at this stage as well. So if this is the case, so if you're pre-registering after creation of the data, you can explain what happened. So in my example, I would say like, okay, because of time limits, I had to already collect data and I only pre-registered after or something. Then they ask you about data collection procedures. So for example, that you will test psychology students from your university, and they will participate in exchange for a course credit or payment. So that's just how you're going to collect participants. Then you need to talk about the sample size. So I typically, or I actually always use Bayesian sequential hypothesis testing. And so I put an example how I typically would respond in this section. So that I start with 30 participants, and then I use Bayesian sequential hypothesis testing until I have a Bayes factor of 10 for against a critical comparison, with a maximum of 60. So then if you would use this approach, it's always important to have a maximum also in your pre-registration, otherwise you can keep going forever. Then you can also add a stopping rule. So for me, I typically have that in the sample size, and then I will just say like C sample size, but you can also really distinguish between the two and explain that your stopping rule in the dedicated field. Then the measured variables. So for me, that was memory performance for word pairs that participants had to study. And then your analysis plan. So this can be very simple. Like for example, what I have is just a t-test. It can really be just your main analysis, your main idea to test your main hypothesis. You don't have to expand on exploratory analysis if you don't want to. You can if you want. There's also a field for that actually for exploratory analysis, but you don't have to. You can, like, definitely when you're starting out with pre-registration, you can just pre-register the main analysis that tests the main idea, and that's sufficient. Then you can also add data exclusion. This is not a mandatory field, but I think it's quite useful and I always use it because I think it's quite important to think about this beforehand, like which participants am I gonna allow in my data set? Like what do you consider valid exclusion criteria, to really think about this beforehand so that you're not biased by the data if you're gonna decide this afterwards. So I think it's really good to think about this before. You can also report what you're going to do with missing data. And yeah, as I said, there's also an option to exclude any information on exploratory analysis. And then they also have a field to report anything other that you could not put anywhere else. And then you get this really nice overview and you can reread all of your sections and edit if necessary. And then you can only register if all these have like the check mark. So all the things on the left have a check mark. So I apparently did not fill out something in the metadata. And so you have to fill out all of the obligatory fields. Okay, so that's very short how you can pre-register on OSF. If you want to look at maybe what colleagues or other people in your field did, it's very useful to use OSF for this. So they have a very large database of preregistrations. And these are preregistrations that are from different formats. So as predicted OSF, they really have a large library of different platforms. And so, for example, if I want to do this study on taking breaks, I can look for this. I can refine my search for different filters. And then I can see how other people did it, other colleagues, how did they do it, how similar studies pre-registered, what kind of analysis maybe they did, what kind of exclusion criteria. So it's very useful to look at these examples. Okay, so we already see quite some trends from using pre-registration and register report in research. So for example, Allen and Mailer studied 127 published biomedical and psychological science registered reports. And they saw that 60.5% of these did not find support for their hypothesis, which is a lot larger than the typical 5 to 20% of null findings that we see traditionally. So this is really quite impressive. Also, a study by Scheel et al. They compared 152 standard reports with 71 register reports. And of these standard reports, 95% found support for their hypothesis, whereas this was only 45% for the RR. So I think that's really, really impressive to see these numbers. We also see that pre-registrations on as predicted have risen every year since 2015. And so this graph is only until 2020. So I imagine that it has increased a lot more since then. But just to show you a bit the trend of when it started until recently. We also see that journals that are adopting the format of register report are increasing a lot. And psychology and psychiatry are really taking the lead here. With the most amount of journals that are allowing this. So I think that is quite nice to see. Okay, so what we saw up till here, so pre-registration of a research consists in announcing beforehand the hypothesis, methods, and protocols. It's a practice that is done in the context of open science and reproducible research. It allows to remedy some questionable research practices and to enhance trustworthiness and reproducibility. Pre-registrations are shared online, for example, in specific repositories or using models. And several journals allow for register report in which the pre-registration is peer-reviewed and the publication is accepted in principle, irrespective of the actual results. Okay, are there any questions before I continue?
I guess I had a relatively mundane question, which was when you do the licensing on your pre-registration, which one do you use usually?
I use CC BY 4 International something.
Okay. Is there a specific reason why you use that one?
Because I looked at all of the options at some point and I decided that that was the one that was the most applicable to my research, or the one that I needed to use in terms of ethics. And I also saw that many of my colleagues were using the same license. And so I sort of decided that's a good license to use. And it has to do with the shareability and the citation. And I think this is a very like typically used one. So it's quite default, I think, in research. But I also don't want to say that everybody has to use this. Like, you should figure that out, but I think it's a good option.
Very good. The honest truth is that in the past, when I've done registrations, I've used the MIT license only for brand recognition. So
Right.
I think probably your reasoning is better than my reasoning. I also thought that it was quite interesting, if I could just comment on the fact that we went from 95% confirmed hypothesis to less than 50%, which, I expected that there would have been a drop, but the fact that less than 50% of the time people have apt hypothesis is quite interesting, huh?
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had any interpretation of why that number was below half.
Well, I think, and that's my impression, that the problem is just, like how I started the presentation, that on the one hand, people are, for example, if you don't pre-register your data exclusion criteria, that you might do this based on the results, and so that you're, based on like how the data looks, and that maybe there's like outliers that you're going to remove, while these outliers, if you would define them beforehand, like maybe they would be allowed to be in there. And that's not always that you're doing this out of bad feelings, or that you wanna your how is it called, like malpractitions, or it's not that you want to do bad research, but it's just like, oh, that looks like a weird outlier, like let's remove it. But that's not always, if you think about it beforehand, you wouldn't per se maybe define that as an outlier. So I think these are important things to think about beforehand and to define beforehand. On the other hand, there is, of course, also the problem of harking and p-hacking, which maybe your hypothesis slightly change after the results are known. And then, of course, what you're publishing is something that is in confirmatory for the results, rather than maybe what you hypothesized initially. And then one of the biggest things, or one of the biggest problems that I think that we see in these percentages, is that many people, if they don't find support for their hypothesis, they might put aside that study, like either because they believe that they did something wrong. They think like, oh, but it's a student that collected this data, like I don't trust the data, or I don't trust the data collection procedure. Probably we did something wrong, we had something in the methods, we have some fault there. It's difficult to publish. It's not good for like your image that you're publishing something that is deemed less interesting, because there's maybe not a lot of new information. It's just saying that this does not work, which some people do not find interesting. I think it's really nice to be able to exclude certain things so that we can continue our search to things that do maybe work. But so I think it's a combination of all of these issues that is what we see in these numbers, that there's just way more reasons or things that can go wrong when you don't find evidence for your hypothesis in traditional publishing. But then when you have registered reports, there's no way back. Like you can't change the story, you can't change anything about data exclusion or analysis, you can't change your hypothesis. You also can't really, you can retract your study, but that would also be weird if you already have the in-principle acceptance. So that's my impression of these findings.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's something that I want to latch on to with your answer, is this idea that there's many things that could potentially go wrong that could lead to a non-confirmed hypothesis. And maybe one of them is kind of badly anticipating data quality, in which case the calculation for the sample size is really quite important. And I'll take the opportunity to also point people towards another OPAM webinar that we ran, where Chris Jongerius explained to us how to properly determine the number of participants to run for your experiment. So for people that are concerned with this potential result, maybe they also want to check out that webinar. With that, I think there's no other questions, so I think we're good to go on.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not going to show this video now, but if you access the slides, this is also something you can watch, that there are just researchers that are kind of talking about their experience with preregistration and registered reports, or it's quite nice to, if you want to get some outsider perspective on this. Okay, so I want to dive into more practical exercises or more things to think about with pre-registration. And so I have different stories. And so I'm not sure if we can do that, but I thought that we could vote. So there's these stories and I will always end in a question. And normally you have reactions on Zoom, I think. Can they react, Ducky?
I see that there's a raise hand function, but I don't know if there's a reaction itself, but people can type things into the chat.
Okay, so let's try. Oh, now I went too far. Oops, I'm going way too far. Okay, back. Yes, okay. Yes, okay. So yeah, we can try through the chat, and I'm hoping some people want to collaborate with me on this. Okay, so the first story, if I can just move this. Okay, what did I do? All these years of Zoom and I still cannot work with Zoom. Okay. So, sorry. How do I hide the panels? Voilà.
For what it's worth, we cannot see anything. So
you can't see
slide,
anything.
but we can't see anything else. So
you cannot see anything. Okay.
You can see the slide though.
The slides.
Yeah.
Yes, that's important. Okay, that's good. Okay. So Sean and Maya are two postdocs working on a project together. They pre-registered the design, analysis, and exclusion criteria before executing the study. All the data are now collected, and Sean and Maya want to run the plant analysis. In doing so, Sean notices that their plant analysis didn't take into account the possibility that some participants would have extremely long response times. Sean tells Maya that they forgot this in the registration and that even though they would typically exclude these responses, they now have to perform the analysis, including these long response times, since that is what they pre-registered. Maya, however, does not agree with Sean and says that they can deviate from the pre-registration. Do you agree with Maya or with Sean? So Maya says we cannot deviate. Sean says we can deviate.
Okay. So I think for emojis, you can respond. And I will agree with Maya on that one.
So you cannot deviate. Okay. No, you can deviate. So pre-registration is not a prison. You can deviate as long as this is clearly explained in a manuscript. So you just need to be transparent. You need to indicate why you deviated and what happened. And as long as you do that, you can. There's also now a function in OSF to update your pre-registration. So if you already submitted your pre-registration, but you realize after the submission that maybe you missed something or you had to add something, you can still update, and then you will get an update with a timestamp of this update, and you can explain what should be updated. There's also a really nice table that I've already used from Wilrod and colleagues. And so they give you the option to really systematically report deviations for your article. And so I have included this kind of table in my supplementary materials. And then I just said like, okay, for deviations of the pre-registration, see the supplementary materials. And so you can say the type of deviation, the reason, and the timing. And then you can include how it was originally formulated in the pre-registration. You can describe the deviation and then also how this impacts the reader. So for my deviations, these were very minor things. And I just explained like, okay, I said I would start with a batch of 30, but we invited a few more participants. So I have a batch of 31. And then I say like, okay, reader impact, nothing, because if I analyze my data for 30 participants, we get the same results. And then I just maybe mention like my most important interaction or something like, okay, you can see that it's still the same conclusion. So it's very easy to just use this table to systematically report your deviations. Okay. So the next story, May is a first-year PhD student that goes and sees our professor and asks if they can pre-register their next experiment. The professor sighs and throws her arms in the air, saying she's very busy and certainly does not have time to make an entire pre-registration. May proposes to do it herself, since she did a workshop on pre-registration, but she asks the professor if she can just check the draft before she submits it. The professor once again says that pre-registrations take up too much time and she already has enough administrative work. She does not have time to check anything, nor does she think May should waste her time on this. Do you agree with the professor? Yes or no?
So I have now actually enabled the chat for everyone so people can actually answer this time around.
Okay.
So feel
Well,
free.
I cannot see that. Oh, yeah.
No. Well, people will answer no. I can pretty confidently say that.
Okay. Indeed, it is time consuming. It does take some time before the data collection analysis, but it really, really facilitates and speeds up the data analysis and interpretation, and it increases the credibility of your research results. So I really like the fact that I pre-registered, because when I have the data, I can just immediately run the analysis. I don't have to think about this. I don't have to think about what exactly should I use, and like what should I exclude, like what are my data exclusion criteria. I can just open the file and go through step by step, and I just super fast. You get to the exciting stuff. You can see your results, the workflow. Okay, so the third story. So Marie's reading an article that is very relevant for an ongoing study she's doing with Bert. She shows him the article and Bert reads through it. After reading it, Bert says that the effect doesn't seem very convincing in the figures and the descriptive results. Marie is surprised by his reaction and responds that the results surely must be robust and reliable because the authors pre-registered the study before executing it. In turn, Bert says that pre-registering a study does not guarantee its robustness or reliability. Do you agree with Bert?
So we have a couple of no's. Anyone else have an opinion, or is everyone on the fence? Okay, we have some yeses.
Okay, so indeed, pre-registration is not sufficient for robust and reliable research. It's not because you're pre-registered that you're doing good science. Like, the pre-registration can still be of poor quality. If the pre-registered design and analysis are of poor quality, just the fact that you pre-registered it is not going to save that. So it doesn't solve all the issues. It's also not necessary for robust and reliable research. You can do robust and reliable research even without pre-registration. But as I showed you also in the trends, it does really help in terms of credibility, and also in terms of the proportion of positive results that is lower compared to standard papers, even just when people use pre-registration. So it does seem to have a positive impact on research. Okay, so next, Dennis is a new PI and he feels like he does not have much time for research anymore. When the open science group of his department suggests that they encourage all researchers to pre-register their research, Dennis is not happy. He says that he has enough of the pre-registration police and that they are slowly killing science because they are making it impossible to make new discoveries. What do you think? Is Dennis correct?
Like, we have a lot of no's this time.
Okay. Indeed, pre-registration of confirmatory hypothesis does not preclude performing additionally exploratory hypotheses. It simply helps distinguish between them. So what you pre-registered and what you explore. It's also fine to not pre-register and just explore. And then when you think you made a discovery, you can still perform a replication or a second experiment that partly replicates and maybe partly tests something else. And then you pre-register that second experiment. So it's not that if you don't pre-register, you're not a good scientist. It's just something that you can help you to improve your research workflow. Okay, so Prosper is a postdoc working in physics. He comes back from a preregistration workshop and he runs into his colleague Chantal in the hallway. He tells her about the workshop and that he was surprised how easily you can integrate preregistration in your workflow. Chantal says she already knows about preregistration, but that it is not possible for her research. Prosper is surprised by this because he learned in the workshop that preregistrations are applicable in many different sorts of research. Chantal explains that she's mostly doing research that uses existing databases, so it's impossible to pre-register before data collection. Prosper disagrees and tells Chantal that it is possible to pre-register when you use secondary data or reanalyze existing data. Do you agree with Prosper so that you can actually use secondary data or reanalyze existing data? Or do you agree with Chantal that this is not possible?
Here it looks like we have a lot of yes.
Okay, so Prosper. Indeed, so there are different levels and moments you can pre-register. As I also showed you on OSF, you have different options. But what is important to keep in mind is that the later you pre-register in your research cycle, the higher the risk of bias. So if possible, it's better to pre-register as early as possible. But, you know, life happens, work happens. So sometimes it's just not possible. And then it's still better to pre-register at a later stage than not at all. So just keep in mind that your bias will become higher. Yes, so this is what I showed you for OSF. So there are different levels of when you can pre-register, and then you can also explain about the existing data. Okay, so Tina is a second-year PhD student, and she's following up on an existing study from a famous professor. The professor knows about her research because she presented a first study of this project at a conference where they both were. At this conference, it already became clear that the professor was not too happy about Tina's research as the results contradicted his original findings. At some point, the professor reached out to Tina to ask about her progress. Tina gave the professor an update but remained vague about her future plans. Until now, Tina has always pre-registered her studies, but after this email, she got scared of being scooped. She talks to her supervisor about the situation. Her supervisor says she should not pre-register as the risk of being scooped is way too high. Tina still thinks that it would be better to pre-register the study. Do you agree with Tina?
This is a more difficult one, but I think everybody's saying yes. Yeah.
Great. So yes, indeed, it's better to still pre-register. It can associate your name with your plan and gives it a timestamp of when you came up with this ID. So it guarantees maternity or paternity. You can also embargo your pre-registration on some platforms. And so you can create an anonymous view-only link for reviewers. And so with this pre-registration, with this embargo, your pre-registration will keep private until a specified date. And you can do this a maximum of 4 years in the future. You can also anti-embargo early. So when you are in the publication process or you submitted the paper, you can decide to make all of the pre-registrations public, or you can wait until it's officially published. Also on this note, there has been a study on kind of the worries versus the experiences of pre-registration. And so one of these is a high percentage of people are scared of being scooped. So these are people that have not yet pre-registered. And one of the reasons that they don't want to is that they're scared of being scooped. And then if we look on the right side here in orange, less than 5% has actually experienced that they were actually scooped. So this happening in reality is much lower than the fear that people have of this happening, at least for pre-registration. Okay, so to conclude on these stories, so pre-registration is not a prison. You can deviate as long as you're being transparent. It is time-consuming, but it typically makes up for this time afterwards. Pre-registration is not sufficient for robust and reliable research, nor is it necessary. Pre-registration of confirmatory hypothesis does not preclude performing additional exploratory hypotheses. Pre-registration can happen at different moments of the research cycle, and thus it's also possible for secondary data and does not hinder data reuse. And pre-registration gives a timestamp and it guarantees maternity and paternity of the IDs. So you can also embargo this pre-registration. Okay, so now I thought it would be nice to do it yourself example on as predicted. So I came up with a very easy example of a study. And so the idea would be that you go to as predicted and you create a self-destroy as predicted pre-registration. And then in, let's say, like 5 to 10 minutes, we can go over this pre-registration as predicted, but then you can first discover a little bit by yourself.
Okay, then maybe for that, what I'll do is I'll pause the recording and we can take 5 minutes and then come back at 5 after the hour, yeah?
Okay. Okay, so I hope everybody had the chance to look at the as predicted form. So we're just going to go through how you could fill out the form for this study. So on as predicted, first they ask whether any data has already been collected. So here I say no, this is not the case. It's also interesting to note here that they give the option to say yes, but then they also say note, yes is not an accepted answer. But so I guess in this case, if you already collected some data, you have to indicate it's complicated and then explain in question 8. For the hypothesis, so I say that in this study, we'll investigate whether drinking beer every day results in weight gain. Dependent variable is that we will measure weight. Conditions is one between subjects variable, the drinking diet, whether you drink beer or you don't drink beer. Then they ask for analysis. So here I explained that we will do a t-test to examine whether the difference in weight is substantially higher for the beer diet group compared to the no beer diet group. Then they ask for outliers and exclusions. So here we will exclude participants who do not stick to the assigned diet based on self-reporting. The sample size, so we're going to start with 60 participants, 30 in each condition, and then do Bayesian sequential hypothesis testing. So yeah, again, this is just an example. You can, of course, also do this differently. And then in the other, I put like no exploratory analysis will be executed. That is, of course, maybe a bit strict. Maybe it's better to put will be pre-registered, I realize now, because of course you can always still do any exploratory analysis that you come up with afterwards. But so in terms of pre-registration, I did not include any here. Then they ask you to give a name. Does drinking beer result in weight gain? The type of study, and then also the data source. Then I also just wanted to show you that we created a list of articles that are very informative for when you want to get into Preregistration Registered Report. We also ordered these in topic of like introduction, more specific, and I also we also indicated the level of prior knowledge that you might need. So these first 2 examples are very good introductory papers that you could read if you're interested. And so that's all. So I just included the sources here if you want to access any of these. So these are all included in the slides. And then I'm still here for questions.
Okay, then we are all at home clapping for you, Caro. Thank you for the very interesting workshop. Maybe I can start off with the questions, and then if anyone has additional questions, they can put it either in the Q&A or in the chat. Either one works. So something that I noticed in the pre-registration you just showed, and also something that I've thought about quite a lot with pre-registrations, is the type of statistics that you can pre-register. So I noticed for you, you said that you would use a Bayesian t-test, and you specifically said that it was one-sided. And this has always been to me a major advantage of pre-registering your experiments, so you can choose more powerful statistics. Recently, as a kind of anecdote along these lines, I pre-registered an experiment. And when I did the power analysis, then I specifically chose a one-tailed t-test. And when the results came in, then I saw that the results indeed worked in a one-tailed t-test, but they did not work in a two-tailed t-test. And in discussion with some people expressed skepticism about this approach. I was wondering if you had any opinion about whether this was applicable, whether there's some caution to be taken, or whether that's totally fine.
But I mean, you mean that you pre-register one-tailed and you end up using a two-tailed?
No, I registered a one-tailed, and then I report a one-tailed, and it works, but it was a p-value of such that if it was two-tailed, then it would be no longer significant.
But I mean, I think that's a question of statistics, no? Like that, then the directional test gives you an effect, but then the indirectional one does not. I mean, I feel like that's more maybe a discussion on a statistical level, and I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that. But I feel like in terms of pre-registration, you pre-registered, you did what you pre-registered, and the interpretation of the results or the fact whether a test is good for your question or not, that's on you. That's not really, like, pre-registration is not really gonna help in any way with that. I think that's between you and your co-authors, and then maybe reviewers will probably comment on that as well. So I think that's more of a, like, apart from pre-registration. Maybe when you do a register report, their reviewers could already give you feedback on the plant analysis before you collect data. So there it could be useful to already think this through and maybe consider what you would do if a two-tailed and a one-tailed are not giving the same result.
Yeah, and I guess that for me, it's always a red flag when I look at when I'm reading a paper and authors use a directional hypothesis and they kind of wave it away as this was the obvious pattern of results that we were expecting. And that always kind of bothers me because then I think, well, this was the obvious pattern of results, then probably should have had a pre-registration to say that this was exactly what I was expecting. Then it should have been trivial to do that. You also mentioned Bayesian statistics, and I was wondering if you could quickly go over sort of the utility of pre-registration in, for example, using a stopping rule.
Yeah, I mean, there I feel that that's very useful to use Bayesian sequential hypothesis testing, because in frequentist statistics you can just like say like, oh, we'll collect a few more and see if then we have a statistical a significant value. Whereas for Bayesian, it's not a problem. You can actually use this approach to save resources on the one hand and still get a conclusive answer to your question. So for whether or not you pre-register, I think it's very useful to use this approach. And then when you pre-register, I think it's even nicer because you have a very clear reasoning, very reasonable. I mean, if you make it reasonable, you can also not make it very reasonable. But if you use like reasonable sample sizes, and then you can use this as a stopping rule. And I think it's very nice. I've never had any issues with trying to publish using this approach. So I think if you use reasonable numbers, both for your starting sample and your max sample, I think that this is quite well, works quite well in at least in my research.
Yeah, and as another sort of anecdote, then I know that for many people, running online studies is great, but they can also get a little bit out of hand because they can get quite expensive in comparison to smaller lab-based studies. And using these optional stopping rules in Bayesian statistics are great because then you can say we'll look for an effect of this size, either in support or against the hypothesis, and we'll collect a maximum of 200 participants. But then as you start data collection, you might already see, oh, the effect is there after 50 participants. Then you don't need to collect the full 200. You already have your results, and it is statistically rigorous already. And this is, of course, not something you're allowed to do using frequentist statistics. And I would even say using Bayesian statistics is a little bit suspicious if you haven't pre-registered beforehand. So maybe that's another point for pre-registration. It could potentially save you money. So. Are there any additional questions or anything additional that you might want to add before sending us off, Caro, to go pre-register?
I have a question, no, a selfish question. So in terms of, I've been thinking about what you had mentioned earlier about the sort of the rates of hypotheses being sort of confirmed or versus no results being published. And I think it's good that we're getting a better example of, the actual. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, say you're conducting a study, that has multiple experiments, and you pre-registered all of them. So you have maybe, say, 5 experiments you pre-registered, and now you have the results. At that stage, how obligated do you feel when you're sort of writing up the manuscript that you include all of those experiments that you pre-registered? Or do you feel like if you're trying to craft the story, you're trying to get things together and say, a couple of these experiments, they didn't work, quote unquote, for some reason, there was some flaw about it that you didn't realize when you pre-registered. I guess, what are your thoughts are when you get to that writing stage, if you have multiple experiments that you should try and include as many of them as you can, or is it okay to drop some of them and leave them in the file drawer?
So I personally feel very strong on reporting all of the experiments I did. I mean, if only to show people all the work that I put in, like that alone is already, I feel like, a good reason. But I feel very strongly about just reporting the exact story of what happened. And I mean, sometimes it's hard to explain that, after experiment 1, we realized that that was actually a stupid choice that we made. It's, sometimes it's not very nice, but there are some ways to deal with that. Like, for example, I have combined experiments, like, for example, that you would say like experiment 1A and B, because they're the same, but in 1A, we maybe like did this, which was less ideal. And then we have the more ideal 1B, but like we're reporting them together. Another thing you can do is also then you just report 1B as like experiment 1. But you mentioned like, we did try this initially in this way, but that did not work for this and this reason because, we realized this or that, and you put that experiment in supplementary materials. I would only do that if I'm really convinced that, or I can even prove that I really made a mistake or there's a programming error or whatever. If there is a reason why the effect is not there in a certain situation, I really think that is important information to know. Even if it doesn't per se have theoretical implications, it might have implications of just how we do research. Like I might make the same mistake as you because I never saw which mistake you made. So I didn't realize that is actually not the ideal way to do it. So I feel very strongly about if I do 5 experiments, I will show them all, I will mention them all. And yeah, I have mentioned, like I have included one in supplementary or one as like A and B. So that I think is totally fine. You don't have to put like pages and pages on an experiment with a programming error. That's not what I mean. But I do think it's important to at least mention maybe something you tried and why it didn't work. And then, I mean, if it's really like a huge programming error, like of course there, I would maybe not like include it because it's just a human error. But as long as you don't really know why it didn't work and it's like a certain condition or something and you think like, oh, that's weird, I really think that that's important information to know. Like, why doesn't it work in that condition? Like something that maybe the next one can think about or, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, then do you have any closing remarks for us, Caro?
I mean, maybe yes, like if you are thinking about pre-registration, and I then mean study pre-registration because I think starting off with registered report is brave, although, courage for that. But so if you are planning to do study pre-registration, it's totally fine to like go one step at a time and like, maybe for your next experiment, you're just going to make the document for yourself and you're going to save it. And then after you collected the data, you're going to look at like, okay, how does this look like? How would I feel if this would have been published? Like, are there certain things that I notice? Or maybe you just notice that it's totally fine and everything that you thought of beforehand is like exactly how you do it in the end. But it's totally fine to like, try this out for yourself before maybe putting it online. And then for your next, like the experiment after, you can publish it online. And then also as predicted is nice because it requires much less information. It's very to the point. So it's a very nice way to get started. And then maybe if you feel more confident, you can move over to OSF, which is a bit more extensive.
Okay, then I think that about wraps it up for today. Thank you again, Caro, for joining us today and for giving this very interesting workshop. And yeah, I look forward to reading all the pre-registrations that are going to be coming out of the OPAM membership in the next year. So thank you again, Caro. And yeah, I hope to see everybody in Denver. And otherwise, thank you.